The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
I had been following James Robilotta, an accomplished author, speaker, coach, and MC, on LinkedIn over the past couple of months. But it wasn't his credentials that caught my eye. It was his keen focus and many posts all about authentic connections that made me curious. When inviting him to a conversation about connection that I recorded for you all to share in today, it was cool to hear how his definition of connection was right in line with the foundation of our Candy community. Specifically, that connection grows when all feel seen, heard, and considered. James has aspired to live his life authentically for his whole life and chose to put pen to paper in 2015 to write his first book, Leading Imperfectly: The Value of Being Authentic for Leaders, Professionals, and Human Beings. Long before the book came to be, James had been speaking internationally to willing and unwilling audiences about curiosity, authentic leadership, and vulnerability since 2009. He now speaks to over 60 groups a year, bringing his thought-provoking talks, each one infused with self-awareness and comedy, stemming from his background as a trained stand-up and improv comedian. His goal is to leave audiences feeling happier and ready to take on their responsibilities in the world. And I'm all for that. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Connector Next Door. And I am with a friend who you can't see him, but he is wearing a Canada hat, but is not from Canada and apparently has more Canada swag than I do. Welcome here, James. I'm so glad you're here to have the conversation with me.
So excited to be with you, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me.
You and I met over LinkedIn, and I love how you're showing up online, and what a treat to be able to have this conversation with you. Many of us that are planning or promoting events for our businesses, organizations, groups, communities, we are natural connectors. And I think that sometimes we do it unconsciously. So when I ask the question, what does connection mean to you? It is a way for us to actually unpack it a bit and learn where you're coming from and why connection means so much to you. So what does connection mean to you?
What does connection mean to me? I think connection means being in a space where we are seen, heard, and respected. I think it's creating a community, not echo chambered, where we're all saying the same things, but it's a place where we are seen, as in for whoever we are, however we show up, whatever we look like, whoever we love, whatever we believe, all those kinds of things. We are seen, we are heard for those reasons as well. I think it's a big piece of it. Any place where you can show up as your authentic self is really beautiful. And it takes courage to show up as your authentic self in a space where you do not know if you are seen, heard, or respected.
It is so beautiful, and it's so interesting because I started something in the middle of COVID. It's called the Connection Architect program, which is really a little bit where this podcast kind of branched off from. But people actually sign that join as a cohort. They sign that they will be seen, heard, and considered, and allow themselves to play in that space, but also that they're going to see, hear, and consider others. So I love that, as much as we don't all use the same language around this, but I do love how you've just defined, I think, what true connection means, and what so many of us are longing for is to be seen and heard, even though it might sometimes be a little intimidating, because it also means you can see right now, and those of you listening, you can't see it, but my messy office behind me. In your world right now, do you feel like people are less likely or more likely to be showing up authentically?
I think we are in a fascinating time where I think mental health is finally starting to get some of the shine and the love and the attention that it deserves. There is still plenty of way to go. We're finally putting it in things like, especially in the United States, and things like insurance policies, right? Like, it's sadly kind of new. And so I can't speak for Canada, but when it comes to being your authentic self, I think that some of that is allowed, but I think it's still at a place where we got to say it with a laugh to not actually go too deep into it. We got to be like, I'm falling apart. Isn't it so funny? It's so, I don't know what's happening in my life. I'm distressed. Right?
Hoping it's going to land somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like, we're all kind of like, I think many of us are secretly hoping for, but also secretly scared of someone who actually reads between the lines and is like, hey, you good? Right? Like, there's
exactly.
that moment of, there's beauty in that we are starting to talk a little bit more about how we are and recognizing that our feelings are valid and we are allowed to be wherever we are. But we're still dealing with older mindsets of keep it in the pocket, right? It's almost like where it's like, you don't need to get too loud or too quiet or too high or too low. You got to keep it in the pocket. And that's where success is. That's where professionalism is. That's where whatever, those kinds of things. So I think, it's an interesting place to see what role authenticity is being talked about more. Many people consider it a cliche word, which bothers me. But I don't know. Just because it's a cliche doesn't mean we're actually doing anything about it.
Agreed. You're a speaker, you are an author, I understand. You come to your work, I think, with that grounding of the improv world, which is really crazy. And I love that. That's a big part of my life here. I love to go to improv. Could you tell us where you're coming from today? So you did show me outside your window. You do have snow, and there's a reason why you're wearing the toque, not just to represent your time in Canada, which is amazing. So, shout out to Canada and all my Canadian friends. Where are you coming from? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, for sure. So I am coming from St. Paul, Minnesota, the capital of Minnesota. Minnesota is Canada light. We apologize almost as much, and it is and very kind. Minnesota nice is a true thing here. But so in those ways, I do sometimes feel like I'm in Canada, but I'm not born here. I'm born and raised in New York, and it's funny, in New York, in Minnesota, we got Minnesota nice, and in New York, we start off questions with, listen, no disrespect, right? And so it's just cool, unique.
You've adapted.
It's a fun transition. Yeah, I've only been out here 3 years, but but we got 8 inches on the ground yesterday, and so here we are. So I moved here because my wife is from a suburb of the Twin Cities originally, and so we moved out here to be closer to her family, so we could start one of our own. We are both professional speakers. My wife, her name is Tina Van Steenberg, and she talks to women about why women need women and how for women, confidence should be a team sport. So she also talks a little bit about community, just in a different way, and taking that concept of sisterhood that we normally only apply to families or sororities, and actually bringing it into the workplace and bringing it into just womanhood in general. So,
boy, I need to talk to your wife, I think, at some point. So
I'm biased, but I recommend it.
There you go.
And I'm a professional speaker, as you said, and I talk about organizational culture. I come at it from 2 angles. One way, I talk about the role that authenticity and vulnerability must play in leadership, because relatability is a really powerful leadership tool. And then the other way that I talk about it is through organizational culture, and talk about how curiosity creates community. A lot of times we hear a little piece of someone's story and we assume the rest or write the rest. We do that because assuming is easier than learning, but just because it's easier doesn't mean it's right. So how are you asking better questions? How are you listening like you might be wrong? And recognizing that there's more to everybody. So let's give them a shot.
It's great when you're talking about authenticity. And when you mentioned that it's a bit of a buzzword, and I am one of those people that tends to sort of back off a bit if I'm like, oh, it's just like, and I've been around the sun a few times, that we've had a few buzzwords in my lifetime. And when it becomes sort of popular, or when it becomes cloudy, I guess, in how we understand a certain word to be, I'm always looking for another way to define it or to describe it. And it seems like you're holding tight to the word authenticity. And so is that something that you have done that work for yourself? Are you feel like, when you talk about being authentic, we need to find that within ourselves before we can start teaching that sort of in a corporate context. But sort of how has that shown up for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I love how you just put that. In one of my talks, I talk about how we have to own who we are before we can be real to other people. I think you and I are on the same page in that way, Lisa, which is beautiful. And one of the problems with authenticity is that we define what authenticity should mean for somebody else. Right, when they're not our version of authentic, or what we believe authenticity should be to them, then we judge them, hold them to standards that we don't hold ourselves to, things like that. And I agree that authenticity is very gray. And there's also a whole bunch of people in this world that are not allowed to be authentic because of oppression, because of systems, because of all those kinds of things, right? And potentially this, I don't want to assume your story, but this is a woman where there's certain ways that you have to show up in order to be seen as credible, or to be seen as professional, or be seen as whatever, right? Because of the sexist things that happen and traditions that are in the workplace. And so hopefully you haven't been subjected to those, but I feel like you have. As you mentioned, you've been around the sun a few times, and you're a woman on this earth. So
there you go.
So anyway, that was a long preface to your answer, or question, I should say. Yes, I've done a lot of work. I told my counselor the other day that I feel like I'm at the intersection of self-awareness and lost.
Okay.
I didn't know that those intersected, but that's how I feel sometimes, where it's like I've done a lot of growth. I'm a firm believer in mental health, and counseling and therapy and coaching, all that kind of stuff. And I use those services, and it's almost like you're uncovering more unknowns. Like you have more, you're uncovering more questions than you are answers. But in that way, I think it's beautiful, because I have learned a little bit more about where I, as a straight white male who was raised with more than enough, kind of fits into society, and can have conversations about that. And I think that's important. It doesn't mean I'm a savior. It doesn't mean that I've fixed everything. It doesn't mean that I am not still a work in progress. But it's doing the work has allowed me to acknowledge that there is more work to be done, whereas not acknowledging it would mean that I'm done and I'm fine and I can just hang out.
I think exactly how you're saying, and my girls are 26 and 22 now, and they're adults, and they have a mixed background. So they will inform me of many things that I just am unconscious about, and I'll say something or I'll do something, and they'll kind of laugh, and they're like, give me the nudge and say, that's one of those things, Mom. And I have to sort of backtrack in my head, like, what did I say? Or what did I do? Or where did I make an assumption? And in that, it doesn't mean that I've lost my ability to be authentic or to be myself, but within the context of our relationship, it matters to me that they are feeling seen, heard, and considered. But that also means that I might need to revisit that again tomorrow and the next day and the next day to understand what it is that really being authentic actually means, and that it is this flexibility over time. How do you find your sense of humor and your ability to create lighter conversations? Or I think when I was reading your bio, bringing people into a place where they do feel that they can open up to a new concept, but in a way using humor to do that. How do you help that to land with the people that are in your audiences?
Yeah. First off, I respect what you said about your daughters and your learning process along with their learning process. That's really beautiful. I just want to acknowledge what you said because I thought it was really cool. As far as humor goes, yeah, my whole speaking style is I get people laughing and then I sucker punch them in the feels, right? Because there's such a power to humor to make people feel comfortable, to, as an audience member who may not want to be there or maybe unsure of what they're about to hear, or they're coming with whatever their day has brought them or life has brought them into this room. Who knows what's going on, but they may be on edge. Their shoulders may be tight, their neck, or whatever, carrying their stress wherever it is. And humor is a massage gun. Right. Like it just kind of drops your shoulders. It drops you, you sit back in your chair, you relax and you're like, oh, OK. There's also there's a little bit of a confidence booster of like, oh, this guy's got it. Right. Like, okay, he's running the room. He's taking care of us. And, and so I also am very intentional to make sure that my talks feel like conversations where I'm like, we're all hanging out. Right. Like this is a good time. And I'm gonna hit you with some messages. Buckle up. They're coming. But like right now, we're warming up and we're warming up to each other. I'm trying to build your trust. I want you to know that regardless of what a fancy bio you may have read about me online is, that I'm actually a human being and you are also human beings, and let's meet there with all the beauty that is humanity and the flaws. And so yeah, humor is a really critical tool to do just that.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about being authentic, this is something that I hear from people all the time is, how can I be authentic and still be respected, still be taken seriously? What if they knew? What if they knew things about me that, whether that's our past or if it's something that's going on in our life today? How does somebody show up authentic? And it sounds like you do that when you're speaking too. So even though, there's an element of performance in that as well. How do you add that element of authenticity? If I could just maybe share from the event industry perspective, I'm a bit of a fringe player, I would say, in the sense that I want to be authentic. And even when I started my company, I'm not perfect. I don't meet every single deadline. I don't keep the fires out of every event, but I certainly will be there with you along the journey. So we want to be accepted. We want to show up and have people trust us. How do you do that where you still can feel authentic while carrying people along with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a balance for sure. And it's different for everyone because we all have our own baggage and our own, whatever we think, whatever our shoulds are, like, oh, I should do this, or I should do that, and I should be this, and I should have said, and I should, look what he's doing, I should, look what they're doing, I should, look what she's doing, I should. Like we should on ourselves a lot. And so authenticity is complex in that way. I like the way Brene Brown sometimes talks about it. She talks about sharing from your scars, not your wounds. As far as vulnerability goes. And at the end of the day, Lisa, something that you and I both know is that not everybody deserves your story.
Right.
And not everybody, like if we were to get on stage or get in front of a boardroom or get in front of a whoever and like be 100% authentic, that's going to take forever. Right? Like, and so time. Yeah. So what I love, I guess one way that I try to think about it and talk about it is looking at the difference between credibility and relatability. And your credibility are your accolades. Your credibility is your titles. Your credibility is the degrees that you've earned educationally. Your credibility is how many decimal places you've moved the numbers in Q3 and Q4. Your credibility is some of those kinds of things, who you know. Whereas your relatability Your relatability is more, it's not about your accolades. It's why does that matter? It's not your title. It's what did you learn on your way to get there? It's not your degree. It's what are you doing with the knowledge? It's not who you know. It's what do those people teach you? It's not the numbers. It's your process. It's not the impact. It's the emotions. It's not just the tangible impact. It's the emotional impact. And so I guess to kind of bring that all back around, when it comes to being authentic, I think it is making sure that you are sharing things in a way that lets everybody know that you are competent and confident, but also still a human. I mean, most teachers, most educators, most speakers, most whoever's, psychologists, counselors, we teach what we need to hear. And I do that. And that doesn't mean that what I'm saying isn't right. That doesn't mean that that what I'm saying should hold less weight just because I haven't figured it all out. I think it does mean that I need to also admit, like, hey, this is what I know to be true. And I'm still working on it also. I think there's a little bit of that of like, hey, we're all allowed to be a work in progress. The idea that you have to finish the race before you can go back and help somebody else run it is archaic, in my opinion.
I just want to sit on that because what you're describing to me just helped put a bunch of things even in my mind, I think, in place. And it's not a linear process to go from one to another, the image to the authenticity. And now I'm being authentic in everything. But I love the word relatable because at the end of the day, we've got to function in the world that we live. We've got to do the work on our teams and with the people that we really care about serving. And within that, it's complex. It's like any relationship is complex.
Yeah. And we're super hard on ourselves.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah,
So
I agree.
We think that because that one time that we hurt that one person, that everybody else should still hate us. Right? Like we haven't forgiven ourselves for some of these things. And therefore, we think we're showing up inauthentically when in fact we are showing up authentically. We just need to be like, you know what? That was a learning moment for me. And yeah, I did the wrong thing. I said the wrong thing. I whatever the wrong thing, but I've learned from it and I've grown from it. And so now here's where I am today because of it, as opposed to, trying to let those slip, struggles, and faults define us in a way that, makes us feel like we need to show up as like, well, here's who they probably meant to hire.
I love that.
Whatever.
Well, and then we second guess ourselves, right? On what actually, how we're showing up. And then it just becomes muddy and confusing, and even confusing, maybe even for your audience, if you're showing up and you've got all these balls in the air and you're overthinking what it means to be showing up as yourself. I love what you were saying earlier. So it's not too loud or not too hot, not too cold. You're kind of riding the middle. And the more that we try to do that, I think the more we actually don't succeed in connecting well, because what are we actually connecting with when we're lukewarm? Right.
We've convinced ourselves that perfectionism is the way to be the most trusted and respected, when in fact it's not. Right? It's not, but that's what we've told ourselves. And so that's why we beat ourselves up. That's what the internet reminds us of, is that we are not blank enough. Whatever it is, cool enough, fun enough, smart enough, hot enough, far along enough, responsible enough. We're not a good enough parent. We're not a good enough partner. We're not a good enough. And because that tape consistently plays in us, is that we are incomplete, that we are fully imperfect. Therefore, we are wrong. We are not enough. And that's the dialogue that we bring into those spaces. Causes us to have imposter syndrome or, confidence issues, when in fact, it's those things that got you to where you are today, and therefore why you're exactly where you should be.
And is that something that you address in your book? So your book is actually called Leading Imperfectly. So could you tell us a little bit about where you actually, speaking of the journey, how did you get to the point where you're like, I'm going to put that down and actually write a book about this? Because I think leaders need to hear this, or professionals, people that are trying to put their best out in the world. Mm-hmm. Leading imperfectly is actually a bit of a, like, are we setting ourselves up for failure by I'm guessing you'll say no, but where did that actually come from, where you just decided that that's something you wanted to put down?
Yeah, I mean, maybe
into
that's
a
why
book
my
form.
book sales aren't as high as I wanted them to be. Good point, Lisa. That's a good point. I should have titled it "Leading Perfectly," and then I could bait and switch.
Oh, and then you sort of give them the feels in the middle.
Lisa,
yeah, okay.
Where were you 5 years ago?
Leading imperfectly. That's where I was.
There you go. There she is. So the book is all about authentic leadership, and how we as humans can't learn things from people who are perfect. We can only learn things from people who are imperfect. So that is why we must lead through our slips, our struggles, our stories, and yes, of course, also our strengths, in order to truly be more relatable leaders and create cultures around us that people can feel confident in trying and failing and getting back up and growing. If you lead with fear as opposed to love, then you don't create a positive culture. Everybody is too scared to show up or mess up or say the wrong thing or do this. And so there's no innovation. It's always going to be, that's the way we've always done it, because people are just trying to stick to the script. Otherwise, they're going to yelled at or reprimanded. So, and a lot of that came for me. Actually, I had a reverse role model in my first job out of graduate school. I got a master's in counseling and then got a job at a university, and then had a reverse role model and a leader there, where nothing was ever this person's fault. And nothing was ever, it was always like, well, if so-and-so had done X, Y, and Z, then I could have X, A, B, and C, or, this, that, and the other thing. And it was a lot of, nothing was ever their fault. And I would ask them for feedback, and they would say, I'll tell you, I'll give you feedback when you're doing something wrong. And I was like, no, that's not what I need. And I need that also, but I also need to know when I'm doing something right. So it was a lot of that, because the way that people approach that individual and approach the leadership around that individual was very telling compared to the way that people spoke to me and the way that I was leading. And so part of it was out of well, if you're going to lead that way, I don't think that's what these students need or these professionals need. So I'm going to lead the other way, because we got a giant hole to fill. And the way people showed up to each of us was very different and telling.
Interesting. And does that story make its way into the book, or did it inform? Yeah. And I love how you're saying sort of a reverse model. We learn from everybody in our lives, and there are reasons why there are people in our lives, I think, either as a warning sign or as somebody that we can aspire to, but always learning. And I love, again, as professionals, as people that are putting ourselves out there, and there is a lot riding for many of us. There's a lot riding on our success, on making sure that things are moving forward. We move to a space of being authentic. Do you feel that, the relatability, do you feel that your business has been moving forward quicker, or where you're actually been given more opportunities? Has it opened the door to things that you wouldn't have thought before would have been possible?
Yeah, I first off, I don't know any other way. Because I learned this lesson before I started my business, right?
Okay.
And so I was teaching. It was originally a speech that I did at conferences that I went to with my peers, and then somebody asked me how much I charged at one of those, and I was like, I don't know who you're talking to, and so I started giving it as a speech, and then a few years later, I fleshed it out into its own book, and so. Yeah, I guess I don't know any other way necessarily. Where I would say it's helped me, and what I believe and what I practice is that, relationships are the core of my sales strategy. And that's hard, because it's beautiful, but it's also hard because you can't plan around it. You can't be like, oh, that person will probably think about me in 3.5 years, so that'll be perfect, right? Like,
exactly.
It's a tough strategy.
The sales cycle is like,
yes.
whatever it is, right?
It's whatever it is for each person. And so there's that little bit of like, put good out in the world, and it's the karma type stuff, right? Where it's like, keep putting good out in the world, and eventually good, will hopefully come back. And so there's a little bit of that, but I'm very fortunate that it's been working for me, right? The relationship plus the talent, I think, has helped me. At the same time as I'm trying to, shift into markets or getting into other verticals or just trying to make myself known in other spaces, it's a long road. And you start back at a cheaper rate, and I got a kid and I can't be leaving the house as much, and we got other bills and we got a house and we got, right, you know what I mean? Like, so it's forced me to also try to figure out, how can I also start to work my credibility in, as a way to try to expedite at least some of that. So it's an interesting balance. I've always built trust through relationships. I think it's, trust is, you need time in order to build it. And so it's an interesting thing for me, but it's worked out for sure, right? I've been on my own as a speaker for 13 years. Been full-time speaking for 13 years. And so something's working. It's also interesting when it comes to selling. A lot of time, because since I'm so relationship based, and my Achilles heel is that I want people to like me. But since I'm so relationship based and that's my Achilles heel, I would currently describe my sales strategy as apologetic. Where it's like, oh, I'm sorry that I'm bothering you. I'm sorry that I'm emailing you. I'm sorry that and that's not, Are
you sure you're not Canadian?
I am Canadian now. I think unfortunately, right. But like, so I don't know where the line is. I don't know where the line is, because I also don't want to be that person who's like, who's got you in his funnel, who's going to hit you with 7 emails in 2 weeks, being like, where are you? You don't like me anymore? What's going on? I thought I emailed you. You don't respond to emails. You don't like emails. Smoke signals? How can I reach you? Right? Like, there's a line between what I'm doing and what that guy's doing that I need to find.
Right.
And that's where trusting who I am, the talent that I bring, and the fact that my message is something that people need, or the services that I provide or something. For the case of a lot of the meeting planners and meeting folks that you talk to, it's trusting that, no, you provide something that they truly do need. You are helping them. And you need to see it as that. I am getting there with thinking that way about my own business.
And it's interesting because completely in service of somebody that is putting an event together, especially if you're aligned in what you're saying and really what I often use the term an atmosphere of engagement, that how are we creating an atmosphere of engagement in the events or the campaigns or these programs that we're putting together? Because at the end of the day, if people aren't connecting well with each other, you've kind of missed the mark. And to have somebody that reinforces that message as a speaker in your team, sponsors, really that is the point. And whether you see these guests again at your next event or the next event or the next event, you're leaving them with something that is pretty foundationally, I think, pretty important. Exactly how you were talking about when your audience kind of sits back and they're like, whew, that hit me, but that was funny, or that I just sort of was able to relax in the moment. And now I'm able to receive what you're saying, or how I'm now feeling like I'm connected with my neighbor because we all had a good laugh all at the same time. And it all happened when you've sort of hit that sweet spot. And I think there's something about the collective experience that I think we've missed over the last 2 or 3 years, that we can start seeing that and feeling that and feel the energy and that engagement in a room with others. So it is I believe, in service to people that are putting these events together. It really does matter who's on the stage.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, associations want people, and anybody who's planning an event wants people to show up and know that they can show up to a place where they will feel safe, where they will feel heard, seen, all those things we talked about earlier. And they also want to show up to a space where they know that they won't feel crazy. Right? Especially, like they want to know that their problems aren't just their problems. They want to know that, and so like creating an atmosphere where it's like, hey, y'all, we're all here. We're all in it together is powerful, right? That's my keynote that I've been doing a lot for associations lately is called "Do You Even Know Me?" How curiosity sparks loyalty and retention, or how curiosity sparks community. And I get people up and let's have a conversation and let's meet somebody in the room and just like, oh wow, I didn't even know that I had this commonality with somebody because I showed up, I was in my own head. Because I don't know who you are. I don't know who these people are at this round of 10 people. And so, so like, creating some of those moments, like you said, are really beautiful. And that's how you get people to keep coming back too.
Agreed.
Right? People come back to that feeling. They come back to the fire for the warmth. And that's what that community creates, is that warmth.
Oh, I love that. How was this showing up when you were a kid? Was it showing up? Were you a natural connector, somebody that really had those elements of, I want to be that catalyst for connection between my friends or the people in my world? Was that something that you experienced when you were younger too?
It was, but I didn't know it. I didn't name it, right? You're just doing it naturally. And then I'm sure this is a book that you are fond of, but Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point came out and named that person. And I was like, that's me.
You got the t-shirt. Yeah.
I'm an extrovert. And I don't know if I hide that well, but yeah, I am an extrovert. I get joy around being around other people. I get joy around making connections, right? And if you've ever done Strengths Finder, Includer is in my top 5, right? And so that's it is just something that is innately within me. And it's also the dark side of it there's always a shadow side to some of it. There's moments where I feel like I'm forgotten and left out, and I write the story that people don't actually care about me, right? And that's the shadow side of it, where it's like, if you're feeding it, then it's beautiful, but if it's not being fed in return, then you're like, who am I? And so, it has always been a big person. Like I'm often the person that people call to be like, hey, I'm in a new town. I've never been to this town before. You have, James. Where's the best place to eat? Do you know anybody here? Could you connect me with somebody? I got you. Right.
I love that.
That's something I love to do.
I love that. And as we're kind of getting to the end of what this conversation is, I'd love to have additional conversations with you in the future. I think there's so many things that we have in common. What would you leave the ones listening today when they're thinking, okay, sure. So James says that I should be an authentic leader, and that this is not necessarily easy. You didn't say that, but totally doable. What could somebody put in motion in the next week that they could actually start to feel that they are taking that step to be more authentic?
I think the step to be more authentic, I think, honestly, it's a lot of deep work, because in order to allow yourself to be authentic, you have to say that you're worthy. And for me, I have a low self-esteem, and it's getting better with, through the help of counseling and having a partner that loves the hell out of me and finds me attractive on the days that I don't, mentally and physically. Those moments help a lot, but it's hearing those folks. Right. A lot of people see our greatness before we do, and it doesn't make them wrong. And so some of it is recognizing that you are deserving to be in the spaces that you are in. You are not there by accident. And so how would you lead if you knew you were enough? How would you love if you knew you were enough? How would you let yourself be loved if you knew you were enough? And we just have to start stepping into the space that maybe, just maybe, Lisa, we are enough. And so what does that look like this week? It probably looks like taking a compliment and saying thank you. Not telling somebody like, oh, that's great that you like the shirt. I got it at Target for $5, right? Like, it's not like no one gives a crap about how much you paid for your shirt. They just think it looks nice on you, and that can just be what it is, right? It's taking the compliment. I think it also looks like you stating what you need or what you want. We have to name what we want in this world. Right. If you have kids and you're burnt out and your partner's not pulling their weight at the household, but thinks they are just because they make a little more money than you, that ain't it. Right. It's about having the conversation like, hey, I need a day, or I need an hour, or I needed this, or I want to sign up for this class, and we got to make it work as a family. Right. It's finding those moments to stand up for yourself and know that what you want is enough and you are allowed to want it. It doesn't make you a bad person. It actually means you're stepping into your authenticity. So that's what I would say.
And I love, and if you don't mind me saying what's right behind you there, the sign that you have, it says, this is what worthiness looks like. As you're sharing what you're putting out in the world, I think we all need to make that sign for our offices or for our desk space, and just to be able to say, this is what worthiness looks like, even though to us, sometimes we have to try it on. We've got to trust ourselves that we are showing up. And ironically, when we're doing that, and you're speaking exactly to me and a lot of the work I still need to do in my life, but where I used to think that would actually destroy my connections. Yeah, that would destroy my connections in what I was, almost counterintuitive, that if I would set a boundary, if I would say no, if I would actually ask for what I need, then it would destroy any hope of connection with other people. Yeah. Whereas I've actually seen the opposite to be true, is that as I start to set boundaries, as I start to name what I need or what I want and be very real and honest and open about those things, it actually has created really amazing, deep and meaningful connection with the right people, which has, I think, changed the game and how I view worthiness. So I love being able to leave people with that, where when we look at what does it mean for us to create connections in our world, it might feel a little uncomfortable at the beginning, but it allows us to move into something much more meaningful.
Yeah. We train the people around us, right? Whether we recognize it or not, we are putting all of our relationships into patterns. And we are training people that if you need me, I will be there, and I will drop what I am doing. Whatever I'm doing will always be less important than what you need. We train that in people, and it's kind, it's altruistic, it's beautiful, but we need to recognize our part in how we have trained some of our friends and our family members in that way. It's not that they're taking advantage of us every time. We've taught them they can. So there's a mix, right? At some point in time, we got to stand up for ourselves. Once we recognize, oh wait, I think there needs to be a boundary here. You can retroactively put in a boundary. That is okay.
And we will have to leave it there today, James. I so appreciate the conversation, though. I think there are so many pieces of this that I personally am going to be processing and thinking about and trying to put in motion as I move forward. How can people continue this conversation with you if they are like, oh, that's something I'm working on, or I would love to have you come to an event, or I need that voice in what I'm trying to communicate to my community? How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. I'm James T. Robo, like RoboCop, James T. Robo all over the internet. So jamestrobo.com, james@jamestrubo.com, James T. Robo on Instagram, right? All those kinds of things. You may even be able to type it in Instagram. It might come up. If not, you can just type in my name, or not Instagram, LinkedIn. But either way, that's where I am. We're all on this journey together. So if any of y'all reach out to me, you're not bothering me. Let's figure it out, right? Like, whether it's just to continue this conversation. Maybe it's not even because you have an event that you need some help with, or you think that I could work with your community. It could just be to connect, and I'm down for that. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of your community today, Lisa. It's really special.
It is really special. Thank you again, James.
Be well.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.